Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaie Laplante. I am director of Miami-Dade College's Miami Film Festival. Welcome to our Juneteenth 2020 commemoration, which features an encore presentation of the documentary film, When Liberty Burns. The film is currently available for rent until midnight tonight at the festival's Vimeo VOD channel, accessible from miamifilmfestival.com. A portion of the proceeds of the rental from today's streaming will go to the historic Hampton House, which is a nonprofit dedicated to preserving the unique history represented by the iconic segregation-era motel in Miami's Brownsville neighborhood. When Liberty Burns originally had its world premiere at the 2020 Miami Film Festival in March, and it won the juried award, Night Made in MIA Feature Film Award, which is supported by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and which came with a $30,000 cash prize. Today's Facebook Live discussion will involve a panel conversation and some interactive time with our online audience. We'll begin with some questions to our panel, and then we will move to questions from the online audience. If you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, please type in the questions in the comments section, and they will be texted to me at that point, and I will be able to read them for our panel. Just a couple of house rules for our online audience in asking those questions. Please be respectful in your comments and questions, and please do not use profanity. I will now introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with the film's director, Dudley Alexis. Its first feature documentary was Liberty in a Soup, about a Haitian New Year's Day tradition. Was also screened at the Miami Film Festival. And his second film, When Liberty Burns, we were honored to have the world premiere, as I mentioned. He won the Night Made in MIA Feature Film Award. It's the third year of this award's existence, and he is the first ever winner to be Miami-based. So welcome, Dudley.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Marvin Dunn. He's a nationally respected scholar in the field of race and ethnic relations. He's also a featured subject in the film When Liberty Burns. He is co-author of The Miami Riot of 1980, Crossing the Bounds with Bruce Porter, and author of Black Miami in the 20th Century, among other books. He is also a documentary filmmaker whose films include Black Seminoles and the Bahamas. Welcome, Dr. Dunn.
Thank you.
Next, we have Branden Jones. He's a certified educational instructor in the Miami-Dade County Public School System and full-time community activist. He is a member of the Circle of Brotherhood, Black Men Solving Their Community Problems. He's a devoted human rights and social justice advocate working to ensure fair and equal treatment for all citizens. He's also a graduate of Miami-Dade College and the Florida Memorial University. Welcome, Branden.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And we have Lonnie Lawrence. He is also a featured subject in the film When Liberty Burns. He was a childhood friend of Arthur McDuffie's and is a retired member of what we know now today as the Miami-Dade Police Department, and he was in service in the department at the time of Arthur McDuffie's murder. He is a veteran community organizer and currently is board chair of the Miami Coalition for a Safer and Drug-Free Community and chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Miami Gardens Police Department, among many other community positions. Welcome, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. So for those who have not seen When Liberty Burns, or even those who have, I just want to give a brief recap of the subjects, the topics that this film covers, because it's quite a rich and complex film. The film begins with history of an overview of the history of racism in Miami. It then moves on to an overview of the history of racism in the police department. That's all before we get to the incident of Arthur McDuffie's death in December of 1979. It also brings in many other examples of police brutality examples from the same era. Moves on to the prosecution of the case under the Florida Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, when the officers that were accused of the crime were acquitted. It sparked off riots in May 1980 in Miami that resulted in 18 deaths and billions of dollars in damage. And then finally, the film concludes with the aftermath of the riot for the Liberty City community, for Miami, for the McDuffie family, and brings that all into context. So the value of a film like When Liberty Burns is not only to prevent history from being forgotten, but also for us to learn from history. So I have a question. My first question is about the events, the recent events in Minnesota. State Attorney Keith Ellison remarked that it was going to be difficult to prosecute the charges that he had brought against the 4 police officers that were there, that were involved in aiding and abetting, as well as the second-degree murder charge. Can you talk about his comments in the context of Janet Reno's failure to get a conviction while prosecuting the McDuffie case? Dr. Dunn, we could start with you.
It's a risky thing for a community, much less a nation, to be convinced ahead of time that police officers are going to be convicted of a crime against a citizen. The chances of that happening are so remote, even when you have evidence such as we saw in Minneapolis. It's not a foregone conclusion. And one of the dangers that we face is when people's expectations are built so high that there's going to be a certain result in a courtroom, and that result is totally opposite of what people expected, then you have a very explosive situation. So I would caution against being so certain that just because we saw that man commit murder in real time, it doesn't mean a jury is going to agree.
I totally agree with you, Dr. Dunn. And as we know so painfully well, you can have all the evidence in the world, and juries tend to lean toward officers and the officer's testimony, and in some cases lack thereof, than they do the evidence that's presented to them. And I too would caution us, let's not get so comfortable that, oh, there's no way they can not find him guilty of what happened to Mr. Floyd.
What do you think can be learned from the Janet Reno prosecution of the time? What can we learn from that 40 years later?
Well, there are 4 officers involved in this, I believe. And in the McDuffie case, I think there were 5 of them.
Right.
And one of the mistakes, in my view, that Janet made, and she was state attorney at the time, not the Florida Attorney General, was that she tried all of them at the same time. And the difficulty with that was that the defendants were able to use their peremptory challenges to remove any potential blacks from the jury. And that's why we ended up with an all-white jury in Tampa. So if that possibility exists in Minnesota, that they could see an all-white jury to hear these cases, and should the state proceed to try all of them at once to avoid the difficulty of 4 trials that the community would be subjected to, those are the kinds of decisions that Janet Reno had to make at that time. She made the decision, I think, to spare the community having 4 trials or 5 trials. She tried them all at once. And in doing that, she gave them a weapon to be used in the criminal justice system to deliver an all-white jury in that case.
I agree with that.
Hmm.
Dudley, did you have a comment about that?
Well, what Dr. Dunn said is right. That's exactly what happened. What Giant Reno did allow them to be able to select an all-white jury. But the thing is, it's the problem always come up is even though we have all those evidence and even other 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 police officers testifying against other police officers, you still end up with that same um, that same result of police officers being not guilty, or and it kind of in the Black community, like, that's what kind of helped build up those anger. It's like nothing ever changed, and it allows that behavior from the police officer to continue. So you see all those things that's happening right now. It's not like we don't understand. At the end of the day, we might get a not guilty plea. We just don't want. I feel like nobody want that those same things keep happening. That system allowing police officers to get away with those type of.
You had in your film a very interesting little clip. I was surprised to see it. I was very pleased to see it. I don't know if you noticed it, Lonnie. One of the reasons that those officers got out was that the key witnesses in the trial, the key witnesses that Janet Reno was counting on, got on the stand and gave different versions of what happened in the beating of Miss McDuffie. Your clip shows those two officers conflicting each other on the stand. In that little clip, you see one officer saying that the blow was struck this way, another one saying it was struck that way. So the jury couldn't figure out whether Marrero did it or another officer did it. And in the confusion, it gave the jury an out to find not guilty. Your film has that little clip. It's just a couple of seconds, but it shows one of the key faults in that trial when they couldn't prove which of the officers actually committed the killing blow. Now, we may have the same situation in Minneapolis. The other officers may be saying that the cop who had his knee on that man's neck, well, maybe that didn't kill him. Maybe the weight of the other officers contributed to it. So you start getting into, well, which officer did what that killed the person? And then it gets cloudy. And once you start clouding things up for a jury, once you start having things not be crystal clear to a jury, you run a risk of getting acquitted.
I think the other thing, Dr. Dunn, is that the testimony of the internal affairs sergeant, Linda, also indicated that they were basically not even paying attention to her testimony.
Yes, that's another credit to the film. I hadn't seen that. I had not seen that jury.
Yeah, they had not paid attention to her testimony at all, and they had already made up in their mind what they were going to do.
Right, and the guy came, well, the truth came out. The truth didn't come out. That was an incredible footage of that jury.
Yeah.
The only thing that came out of that riot, the McDuffie riot, Lonnie, you may or may not agree, that lasted, that made a big difference, even today, was that because of the 3rd District Court of Appeal in Florida, attorneys can no longer eliminate people from being on a jury just because they're Black.
The preemptive challenges, yeah.
Exactly. And Wilkie Ferguson, who was, as you know, Wilkie, now deceased, was on the appellate court, a Black man, and he wrote the opinion. So lawyers can't do that. But if you imagine for a moment that the McDuffie jury had been all Black and found those guys, the officers not guilty, would there have been a riot? There would have been confusion. There would have been what? But you may not have had a riot. Had there been 3 Blacks out of that 6-person jury, would there have been a riot if they all found that the same result came about? It gets down to justice and the perception of justice. So as we watch what happens in Minneapolis, let's look at who's going to be on the jury. And let's look at the strategies used by the attorneys to protect their clients, which is their job.
Yeah.
And nothing is to be taken for granted. We learned that lesson 40 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So on to my next question. Dudley, you just remarked, and of course it's a common sentiment right now that really nothing has changed since 1980 to present day. But the one thing that is different is the existence of smartphones and social media and body cams for the police.
Don't say nothing has changed. I hear that all the time.
Okay.
Don't say that. I was here when they killed King. Don't tell me nothing has changed.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You're sorry? My point is, if you take the long view of history, it's the last 80 years, just the last century, or the last 50 years, even in Miami, and say nothing has changed. That just isn't true. Not enough has changed. Not nearly enough has changed. But before McDuffie, we didn't have Black police chiefs in our communities. We didn't have Black women and Black men moving up into at least the mid-management ranks in the police departments. So one of the changes that I think that happened, Lonnie, you know better than I think we saw some movement of Black officers up into more command ranks in the police department. Not just in Dade County, but I think the same thing was reflected to some degree in Miami. And that's major, because before that, it was just, you didn't have, Lonnie was probably one of the highest ranking Blacks in the county police department at the time. You were a major, correct?
Yes.
How many other Blacks were in high positions at that time as you were?
We only had, I think, 2 others.
Right. My point.
One thing, let me say something. One thing I can say, a lot of the change that happened, I've seen that happen with Blacks moving in the ranks was the case that was brought forward by the Progressive Officers Club. And also what people are saying when nothing has changed is the idea those things keep happening and we keep seeing the same result. And
they're right about that.
McDuffie,
Yeah,
the McDuffie thing happened 40 years ago. And almost exactly 40 years later, we had the incident with George Floyd. And we can keep going back, not even months,
totally agree
weeks,
with you.
in weeks, and the same thing keep happening. And when we're addressing those ideas, and I feel those ideas are not being challenged enough. Like that, it's not the question of policy change. They can keep changing policies all the time. It's not just policies that make those things change. It's the idea behind, people get around the policies to commit the same things to do the same thing, they've been doing to conserve those idea of white supremacy. They go around the policies, and those things keep happening over and over again. And even in Miami, we still have those shootings happening in Miami, even with a police force that's even not heavily white. It's just it's a mostly Hispanic police force, and those things keep happening in Miami. We live in South Florida. Of the case that happened in West Palm Beach, those things are still common, and that's what people are talking about. And to say some stuff have moved along, but a lot of the stuff remain the same. A lot of what years.
Let me clarify what I meant. You're right. Nothing has changed in terms of Black men being beaten to death by white police officers unlawfully. That has not changed. Absolutely correct about that. Yeah. What I'm saying to you is that the social and to some degree the economic conditions underlying the Black community since 40 years ago, some of those things have changed. But when you say nothing has changed, you just sort of just throw that out the window. You dismiss what things have been done on behalf of the community by those of us who are a lot older than you are. Some things have changed because we were out there making them change. Maybe not fast enough, maybe we need more things to change, but don't say nothing has changed. Hell, what have I been doing for 50 years in Miami if nothing has changed?
I think though that the one thing that you can't legislate is humanity. You can't legislate a person's hate or what they feel inside of them and how they feel towards somebody else. You can train them as we do cultural sensitivity training and what have you. But if they got in their heart a meanness or a dislike of someone because of who they are, all the training in the world is not going to do anything with that. And you can train them, they can be certified, and just like psychological training, you can test a person, and until they get into a situation where it strikes them, they're going to go right back to not what they learned in that training, but they've learned over the years of their growth. And that's the one thing that you just can't change. I think you just have to keep at it and keep doing things, holding people accountable, because otherwise it's not going to change. But things have changed in terms of African Americans being in positions of authority, being in positions of supervisory levels. So there have been some things that have changed. But that's one thing that it's going to take more than just training to make a difference in that respect.
Yeah, the police chief in Atlanta when this happened is a black woman, right?
No,
the mayor's black of the city.
The mayor's black.
So even when we've had blacks in leadership positions at the top of government, we still have had these things happen in some of those same cities. So you're right. It's a combination of a lot of things, not just policies or bad apples, but it's just a confluence of things that we have got to figure out as a society.
Yeah,
and we've not yet done that.
I feel like it's we live in. We should ask the question: what allowed those police officers to do that? That's the question I feel.
Culture allows it. The culture allows it.
That's what I'm saying. It's the culture that allows it. And the culture
allows. No. The culture not only allows it, it rewards it. If you get up there with that, arrest the most people you can arrest and get as many charges to stick as you can, or to write as many tickets as you can, that gets rewarded within the police department. The other thing that gets rewarded is the way that police officers approach people, particularly black people, particularly young black people. I won't use the language on air here, but the way that an average young black man gets approached by a police officer in this town is not, "Good afternoon, sir, how are you doing?" It's, "Get over here," and it gets.
The fact of the matter is that evaluations. If you take an officer's evaluation, it's evaluated. He or she is evaluated on productivity, and part of productivity. I mean, we don't talk about quotas. Quotas are not what people use. But if you use productivity as a base for how you evaluate a person, good, bad, or indifferent, then it results in that. What do you do? What do you do in your 8-hour shift? See, we don't reward people for stopping, getting out your car, talking to the young kids and people on the street, walking up to someone's house who's sitting on a porch and talking to them, getting to know them. That's not something that unless some of the evaluations now show that, then that's not something that's evaluated.
Exactly.
That should be at the top of the list.
Exactly. I have come up with what I think is just another way of looking at policing altogether, because it's not just the policies. We got to look at what's the purpose of the police. Are they there to catch the bad guys, chase the bad guys, or are they there to protect us? And I think that has been lost in policing in general. For the cops are there looking for the drug dealers, the bad people, as we need them to be. In the meantime, as Lonnie just pointed out, they're not talking to us. They're not in touch with us. So believe if you take, and I'm interested in what you think about this, Lonnie, take a couple of good police officers, respectful police officers, not necessarily black, but good police officers, and have them go to the worst corner in Liberty City and take out a couple of lawn chairs and sit there for 8 hours and just look and watch and just be there and talk and visit. What do you think would happen to crime around in that block or so, Lonnie? Those cops, and the next day, the same officers are sitting there. And the next
There wouldn't be any.
There wouldn't be any.
There wouldn't be any.
And people over time, but that's Officer Williams. He was here yesterday. He's going to be here tomorrow. But now he knows who's having a baby. He knows who's just got out of jail. He knows we need to get these officers out of these police cars and sitting down in one place and watching and listening and helping and visiting with the people. Not driving around with your windows up in your car, the air conditioning blasting, and shotgun in the trunk. That has to change about policing. And Lonnie's dead. That's the kind of thing that needs to be rewarded. I think they should take the best officers they can pick, the best ones, give each one of those officers a $20,000 bonus to walk a beat in Liberty City, to walk a beat in Overtown. $20,000 on top of what you get now to walk a beat in Liberty City. And we're going to pick you based upon your ability to help people and relate to people. Make it worthwhile in that person's career to get out of the car and on foot or on a bike or on a horse in the community.
Sure.
I'll stop preaching. I'll get off on it. But we got to.
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
If I could, to that point, to what and good, hello to everyone. It's a wonderful discussion, Dudley. Once again, amazing job you did. But to that point, we with the Circle of Brotherhood, an organization I'm a part of, we have they've been charged with, in a positive way, with serving the community by taking certain cadets from certain municipalities through police trainings before they graduate. And so I participated in a number of them. And what we've noticed is not only are they young stewards to the craft, youngest 20 years old, we had one getting ready to graduate. And the oldest, I believe, was about 31. But if you notice, none of them live in the geographical area of the communities they serve. They're hired for the county or the city, but they live in Weston, they live in Davie. And so being able to, there was a time, back in the day, and I'm not that, can't tell my age, I'm getting ready to turn 30, but I remember even at the time, at 30, at 29 now, I can remember having, close relationships with certain law enforcement officers who were in the community. And like Dudley has said, and Dr. Dunn, yeah, we've had some change. We've came up under Dr. Dunn's time. You have seen a tremendous amount of change. But for us, I can remember myself alone, being a novice to Overtown, growing up in Liberty City, and taking my girlfriend, who's my wife now, home. And because I didn't know about the one way in Overtown, I get pulled over by the cop. It's 11 at night. I get pulled over by the cop, and the cop asks me, hey, so what are you doing in this area? I'm like, hey, I'm just dropping a girl and putting off home. I'm like, I'm getting ready to go to college. He said, oh, what are you going to school for? I said, agriculture. He said, oh, you're going for agriculture because you want to know how to grow marijuana, right? And I was like, wow, what did I do to deserve that? And this was in 2011, And so to that point, once Dr. Cornell West said it, you can't save the people unless you serve the people. It's impossible to serve a community and save a community if you don't serve the community. By serving them, being a part of their daily lives, their daily activities, because you have officers like that, right? But then you also have other ones. Whereas, being a young married man in Miami, me and my wife, we got into it one time, and it was Christmas Eve. I knew I was going to jail, Dr. Dunn. I knew I was. The officer came because he was familiar with the community, because he knew my grandparents, they talked to us. And then afterwards, followed back up on Monday to make sure, hey, is everything okay? Here's a number 2, if you all want to go talk to this counselor. But that's what we need now in our societies. We need members who are going to protect and serve. But in order to do that, you have to be familiar with.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if community police officers who have earned the trust of the community, if they had provided by the county in one of these gentrified apartment buildings in over town, a very nice apartment that police officer can use to let someone sleep in if there's a domestic dispute that he knows the next morning is going to be all blown over. Why you got to call 2 or 3 officers to come to this apartment? By the time the cops get there, things are more or less over. We need to give officers resources in the community to help people that will not make it necessary to call sworn officers in to take care of minor things like domestic disputes that are obviously going to be blown over in a matter of minutes. We got to think of new ways that police officers can serve the community, provide resources, unlike what we now expect them to do, and then end up with a community that respects and knows them and depends upon them for certain kinds of help when they're in trouble.
What do you think that Dudley's film can do at this moment to contribute to that?
Well, for one, a lot of organizations, if I may ask, having law enforcement officers now partner with local grassroots organizations who serve the community. There's quite a few ministers and the Circle of Brotherhood who have joined arms with law enforcement officers to show that, we are here for one another. How I mentioned already about the training of the cadets. So not only do they train the cadets, but they have even recently was funded by the county in order to have peacemakers in the community, where you had individuals who, like Dr. Dunn mentioned, when law enforcement officers get certain calls, instead of just going to the home, they would take someone who's familiar with the community, who serves the community every day. And, by showing that camaraderie, by showing that they work together, the community then begins to trust to the law enforcement officers. Once again, at the end of the day, policies and procedures, they will change, right? Law enforcement officers, it's not going to be abolished. But in order to make the society better, I believe law enforcement officers, and you all have hit it on the head, coming together with local grassroots organizations, with organizations who are in the community every day serving people and showing them, because at the end of the day, you're only going to make a positive change with an individual when you're connected with them on a day-to-day basis. It is impossible for you to serve somebody and you don't know the person. I mean, exactly. and you can try, but and I go ahead, Dr. Dunn, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to agree with what you're saying, and then also speak to your question of the film and what it could do. I can't tell you how many films I've participated in, documentaries on Liberty City and the riot. So many I can't recall. But this film is different. People should see this, especially now, given what's happening in this country, because this film goes full circle with our history, with our pain, and shows where we are today and folks who survived it, where the family members and others who were a part of this are today. And that brings us fast forward to what's going on in the country right now. So the film is timely. It makes us think through our own pain and understanding better what's going on in other places. And I think some other places around the country needs to see this film because it's so beautifully done in terms of impact, authenticity. It's just a wonderful film that should be widely seen.
Look, I think the other thing too is that particularly our organization, which is Noble's South Florida chapter, are doing some things to partner with organizations and in the community and doing more outreach with certain things like the Dolphins United and dealing with young people there, the 5,000 role models, dealing with young people there. And one of the things that happens is that police departments, generally speaking, have always been guided in their operations based on what the community's, the temperature of the community is, if you will. If you go back, you look at programs that were involved in police departments. I hear people talking about
I think we
lost Mr. Lawrence. Okay, well, while we wait for him to log back in, I'm going to take some questions from Facebook. First question is for Dudley. Considering documentaries as a tool for social change, what results so far have you seen from When Liberty Burns? Considering the film has just screened the one time in March and is now just emerging, what initial change results have you seen from your first rollout of the film?
Well, because the film so far only had technically 2 screenings, so I cannot say I've seen a lot of results coming from the film. But one thing, it's people that have seen it talk to me about people that lived through the riot, talking to me about how the film kind of brought back some memories, and also younger and younger people that from my generation talking about what thing they did not know, and how how they can help move the conversation forward. And that's what actually I want the documentary to do, is to be part of the conversation. And that's one of the things I did in trying to do this project. I try to focus a lot on this project. Why I wanted to focus on why those things happen, and Mr. McDuffie, and by focusing on him being that person in that place, and all those things was going on around him, people kind of understand why those things happen, and how we can move forward, and how we can keep them from happening again.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Facebook. This is for Dr. Dunn. The question is there any monument to Arthur McDuffie? Has there ever been a mural on 36th Street?
No, and there should be. We had a caravan just a week or so ago that went through Overtown in Liberty City, stopping where 2 young men, Black men, lost their lives to police in Overtown. And we ended up at the location where McDuffie was killed, at 38th Street Northeast and Miami Avenue. There's nothing there. It is a spot that—
I'm sorry.
It's the spot where Miami's history was changed. That location should be memorialized, not just a sign stuck in the ground, but that is hallowed ground where that man died. And that space needs to be acquired for public preservation, historic purposes, and a proper monument and other possible things should be constructed there that would tell the history of the community and of this particular event. I've approached Mayor Suarez about this, and he seems to be in favor of it. As a matter of fact, he was on the caravan, and at the spot where they killed McDuffie, we laid flowers, and the mayor was asked, "Do you think a memorial needs to be placed here?" And he said yes. So maybe something will happen.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Jay, I'm sorry, I got disconnected there.
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you. Let me just try to finish this point. I know we want to get to the other questions, but let me finish this point. Police departments have always been sort of guided by the temperature, if you will, of the community reference to what police should be doing. And if crime in the community's eyesight was out of sight, then they would yell, "We need more police. What are the police doing? We need more police on the street." And with that came the elimination to some degree of programs that were designed to interact with young people. Because I have people come to me and say, "What happened to the officer friendly program where officers were in the schools?" I mean, they still have some things in schools, but it was a little bit different. I think that we get back to community policing in its real sense. And that's one of the things that I know our national office has been pushing. And being able to allow officers or to encourage officers to get to know the community, because most of the officers who own police departments have no idea about the communities in which they're policing, none whatsoever. But they hear all kinds of negative things. It's a jungle, it's a war zone. And when you tell people those kinds of things and you put that kind of thing in their head, then the natural response is going to be, they're going to go out there prepared to go to war. They're going out there prepared to fight. And we have to make sure that that kind of tone is not used, number one, to describe our communities, and number two, to influence how officers go out and do the job that they're supposed to be doing, and that is serve and protect. Or protect and serve, however you want to put it. But we have to do that. We have to change that whole philosophy about how we police on the streets.
Okay, thank you. We've been moving through some questions that are been posted on Facebook. So there is a question for you, Mr. Lawrence. It's in relation to your being a member of the police department at the time of the Arthur McDuffie incident. The question is, how were you able to mentally and emotionally deal with the tragic loss of your friend, navigate through the ordeal while still showing up for the job, for work?
Well, let's just say it was probably, in my career, it was probably, if not one of the most difficult things that I ever had to do. And a lot of prayer, a lot of talking with someone who was close to me, because I did think about giving it up. My thought process was, how can I be a part of something that did something like this? But I also realized that I could help to change some things, hopefully, or to influence some things by being there. I couldn't do it by being outside, being a part of it. But it took a lot of soul searching and meditation, if you will, prayer and other things to keep me going. But I knew I had to do it. I wasn't going to back away from it.
Lonnie, if you had quit that job, I would have come down to that police department myself and whoop your behind with your gun on your hip. For you to get that high and you walk away because you got no, we wouldn't have had that. No. A lot of us would have whooped up on you if you tried to quit.
One thing I wanna mention, while I was doing this project, is what I found out about the Progressive Officers Club and the actual work they did to change so many things in the Miami Police Department, and about inclusiveness and hiring people of color in the Miami Police Department and hire them.
Miami-Dade Police Department.
Yeah, Miami-Dade Police Department, and putting them within the ranks. This is one. This to me, this is one of the most wonderful thing I discovered doing this project, is about those not only police officers, lawyers, and that did those type of work within the police department, within the city of Miami, like nobody know about right now. Valeria Blaine Thomas, which worked in the Miami City as a county lawyer, and ended up changing those ID laws for Black citizens had an ID on them to travel to certain part of Miami. And to see she was somebody in the background that worked to make sure those laws were abolished, and those are people you don't hear their names in the city. And I feel doing this project, I found a lot of those stories, and I really appreciate that. I'm really thankful for that in many ways,
Okay, thank you. I have another question from Facebook. This one is from Jonathan David King. He's asking, in a Miami-Dade Commissioners Public Safety Committee meeting, Commissioner Joe Martinez said what happened in Minneapolis was a tragedy, but it hasn't happened here. What are the panelists' thoughts on this comment, and how do we as a community make lasting change to how we are policed when it seems elected officials, police departments, and police unions here are not willing to compromise? What are your thoughts on this question? And Mr. Jones, would you like to, go ahead, Mr. Lawrence.
No, I want to make sure I understand. He said that what happened in Minnesota has not happened here.
This is what the questioner is quoting as saying. I don't know the comment myself, but yes, that was what he has quoted the commissioner as saying.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'll defer.
So let me make sure I got this right. The commissioner said that what happened there is not happening here.
Has not happened here.
Has not happened here, but of course, when
what happened?
Proves otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. Well, see, McDuffie happened here. I mean, it wasn't someone with their knee on someone's neck, but he was beaten to death. So, and that was 40 years before this happened. So something has happened here. And that's not the only thing that's happened here. And we had other places, LaFleur and some other things that have happened here before, long before the Floyd case happened. So I'm not sure I understand the context in which that comment was made to really get a feel for how I need to respond to it.
Maybe we should tell them about Lozano, Lonnie. Tell the commission about Lozano, where you have a police officer steps out in the middle of 3rd Avenue on a Saturday afternoon and fires a shot at two black men on a motorcycle and kills the man who's driving. The motorcycle hits the car and kills the man who's on the back. And that was a big mess. The police officer walked into the video game room in Overtown, and this boy's playing a video game. The cop puts the gun to his head and says, "Don't move." Boy turns his head and his brain's blown out. And come to find out that the trigger had been manipulated. So hasn't happened here, Commissioner?
Yeah. See, that's why I don't know in what context it was said. So I'm not sure I understand how to respond to that. Because if it's just strictly that it hasn't happened here, I'm not sure what he means by that.
Yeah. Brother Lawrence, if I could just, in thinking about that, and I'm always taught, by my dad, huge community activist in the community, Leroy Jones. He teaches me, right? He says all the time, Branden, perception is a heck of a thing, the way we read into things. So he always teaching me, never to read into anything. But what I will say is this: yes, we may not have law enforcement officers in Miami with their knees on an individual's neck for 8 minutes, right? But killing a man doesn't just start with the physical side. You have incidents every where, people are mentally and psychologically have their need on by law enforcement officers, not giving that next or second or third chance, even when it comes to, we're no novice to it. Law enforcement officers doing things like, pinning drugs and X, Y, and Z on other individuals. It happens. So yeah, they may not physically in Miami kill, and let me take that back. Maybe physically killing someone the way that happened up there has not happened, but daily we see it spiritually and with our, with the spirit side. It happens all the time.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Every time a police officer arrests a young black man in particular for some minor offense, and that goes on his record, that person is marked for life.
That's for the rest of your life. Every job,
military job, so it doesn't matter if the charges were dropped the same day. Yep. Once you get that mark, and any police officer who has participated in giving someone a record based upon some minor thing should realize that first arrest, that first charge, whatever the result of it might be, ruins that person's life, marks him for the rest of his life.
Yep.
I just agree with you. There was different ways to kill, starting with little ways, such as ruining a person's life by giving them a charge that they didn't deserve and that follows them the rest of their life.
Well said, Dr. Dunn.
So I'm just gonna read one last question from Facebook since we're almost at 5 o'clock, or almost out of time. And this question is reflects a lot of the themes of what we've been talking about. But this person's question is, how can we demilitarize and rehumanize the police departments?
Wow. Hey, I know for one thing, I'll say this: evaluations. Anscombe, she a philosopher, she writes in psychologist, she writes in 1956, Modern Moral Philosophy, and she says it's impossible to deem a person ethical or to test their values and their morals unless you know the psychology of the individual, right? And so I told my wife this. I said, I can only imagine every single day going out into neighborhood policing and the crime that you see, how that mentally affects an individual. Whereas I honestly believe you have individuals who walk into this line of work with a heart of service, but because of what they see daily, it's easy to turn into those things that you see. And so doing that one-time evaluation when you come in, I believe those, when it comes to policies and procedures, monthly law enforcement officers should go through those evaluations, because it's not an easy job, so giving them the tools that they need physically and mentally to help them, and then connecting them to society, allowing them, like you said, if you want to make ranks, well, show me how many community events you participated in this week. You want to make rank, show me the reports. Instead of having a report that you fill out for, those who you detained, what about the cases that you saved, the lives that you mentored? And by doing that, you will get a closer sense with the community.
Yeah,
you also got to realize that
right.
a lot.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lonnie.
To incentivize those things that draw you closer to the community. Exactly. That's really what you're talking about, is incentivizing it. The other thing is too, is that people like to get toys.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of these things are toys for folk. And but I think we just have to go back to the drawing board, and nobody's talking about, getting rid of police, because that's unrealistic for the society that we live in. It's unrealistic at this point in time. So we have to do things to make the job easier, because I think there's some things that will make the job easier. And you're right, law enforcement is not an easy job. You see some stuff out there, you get called to some stuff, and it's hard when you have to deal with it. And there's nothing like being called to something by a potential victim. And when you get there and you start to begin to take the action that you need to take, that the victim turns on you.
Yep.
Until you experience it, you don't understand it. But that happens. So we have to change the thought processes of on both sides, in our communities and in the departments, to say that, hey, this is not about us against. We're here to make it more palatable for you to live in this community and grow your family and be on about your life, not to take advantage of you in any kind of way.
When we're talking about militarizing police, and it all go back to what people are talking now, funding. That funding and that money that goes toward buying all this stuff. What else they can do? you're spending money on buying things, you know, and distribute that to police officers all over the country. What else that money can do? Why do an officer need a thing for local policing? And those are questions that need to be asked. Why do police officers need so many gears while there's other program you can spend that money on to prevent crime? There's other program you can spend that money to help people with mental health. There's other program you can spend for like after school program. You hear all the time people complain about how kids, you know, there's no after school program for kids, and yet there's so much money being spent on militarize the police. And can those money be diverted to stuff that can prevent kids to, you know, to go you know, prevent kids, you know,
the reason the police spend so much money on weapons and militarized things is because they're afraid. A lot of police officers are just afraid of Black people in particular, Black young men in particular. So they go to work afraid. They want the cars and the weapons and the stuff that would protect them from the folks they're supposed to be serving. So we need to deal with the fact that a lot of police officers are just afraid, particularly of young Black men. And how do we get them past that? By getting people in contact with each other, knowing each other, visiting with each other, talking. That gets us past the need police may feel to have the militarized weapons that you're talking about.
But you know something, Dr. Dunn? A lot of this goes back to, has nothing to do with the Black community. A lot of this goes back to, as we called it, the war on drugs. When the drug dealers had more powerful weapons and shootouts and confrontations with police than the police had. And that's where you saw a lot of this beginning to crop up in terms of heavy weapons and what have you, being bought and being offered to police departments through various programs. It had nothing to do with what was going on in the Black community, because a lot of the stuff that was happening in the Black community, in terms of weapons, the Saturday night special was the weapon of choice by folk in the community, and it could be a 22 or a 32. So they wouldn't walk around with no semi-automatic weapons and what have you. So it grew out of that, and it kept growing until it became the norm rather than the exception.
Well said.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. Thank you, Dudley, for the film. Most of all, we hope that if anyone watching has not had a chance to see it, that you will take the opportunity to stream the film before the end of the day. And certainly, we hope that When Liberty Burns continues to be widely seen in our community. And again, thank you to all of you, our panelists, for your time and knowledge.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing job again, fellas.
Thank you.